Shalom, it's Rabbi David Barron with my weekly Torah talk. Before I begin the talk, I'd like to remind everyone that I'm taping this here from the beautiful home of our Temple of the Arts, the Saban Theater in Beverly Hills, and we're very much looking forward to resuming our Shabbat services despite the outbreak of Omicron, which we're praying is going to be ending very quickly. We are in the meantime planning outdoor Shabbat dinners and services, so please make sure you're on our email list. Go to bhtoda or templeofthearts.org and you'll be able to register to be on our e-blast list, and you'll get information about upcoming Shabbat dinners and celebrations and special events. This week's Torah portion is the portion of Mishpatim, which means ordinances. Last week, we read about the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, better known as the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, the 2 tablets of the covenant. And this week, we have a lot of civil laws. And I'd like to talk about 2 of the really important laws. There are so many in this portion, but I'd like to speak about 2 of them because they have important insights for the way laws evolved in Jewish tradition and also in terms of our own day and our own observance of laws. You know, the Torah makes a distinction between premeditated murder and accidental murder, bishgaga, b'mezid, how something might occur that someone might accidentally kill someone, and what the result of that action would be and what the judicial decision might be, as opposed to a planned, premeditated murder. Actually, the witnesses have to be interviewed, and very aggressively interviewed, and according to Jewish law, it takes 2 witnesses to convict someone of a major offense, and those 2 witnesses have to be cross-examined separately and make sure that they aren't what the Talmud refers to as witnesses who were plotting witnesses, edim zomimim, plotting witnesses who decided to get someone into trouble, and they plotted in that manner. And how would they be punished if their deception and treachery was uncovered? So we have a lot of in-depth laws in the Torah portion which are greatly expanded upon in Talmudic texts, but I'd like to speak about 2 of them. One is the law of taliation, and so many of us know about that, and sadly it's a law that some people attribute to the cruelty of Judaism, and it's so unfair. The law is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein. The idea that someone who puts out your tooth, you have the right to put out their tooth. Kind of a taliation or an equality in the way the judgment was meted out. Now, in ancient times, and even in some places in our own time, if someone knocks out your tooth or accidentally puts out your eye, you probably will respond by killing that person. At least that was what was the prevalent action in ancient times and probably in our own Wild West. But the Torah said, no, that's not right to take the life. If someone inflicts an injury, let's make it equal response to that injury. And in fact, the term that's used isn't an eye for an eye. That would be ayin la'ayin. It's ayin tachat ayin. Tachat means under, beneath, in place of, if you will. So the idea that compensation had to be given to the person who was injured for the loss of that eye or for the loss of that tooth. And again, the concept broadened out as we lived in ancient societies where someone would kill someone for an injury. As Jews became urban dwellers and we lived in a more cosmopolitan environment, not just as shepherds and wanderers, we realized there had to be some kind of system set up, and the rabbis did so brilliantly, allowing compensation for the loss or for an injury in this case. So that's one of the really fascinating laws in this week's Torah portion, the law of taliation. The other one to me is much more profound in many ways. It's the concept of you shall not oppress the stranger who lives among you, because you were once strangers in the land of Egypt. The idea that the stranger should be treated equally and decently and with respect. And that stranger really can be anyone who crosses your path who isn't part of your family. In many societies, we had this concept of the citizen and the alien. And if you weren't patria, if you weren't part of the family of that nationality, you were a nobody, you didn't count. But the Torah says, no, you have to treat the stranger with respect and honor that person's right to live a life of dignity. And that's a very powerful lesson for us today, and I think it is in each and every generation, to respect the strangers, because we must remember we were once strangers in the land of Egypt. That harkens back to another important component of that lesson, which is the idea of not passing the sting. Just because you were slaves in Egypt for 400 years doesn't mean you should be cruel to someone who's an alien or stranger, even though the Egyptians, during the period of your slavery, enslaved you on such horrid grounds and treated you without any dignity or respect. That doesn't mean you should go on and inflict that on someone else in your lifetime. Now, a lot of that speaks to the idea of abuse. We know from statistics that people who abuse children were probably abused as children in their lifetime by their parents. But the cycle has to be broken, and the person who was subject to that abuse has the capacity to break that cycle. And it's true also in terms of the history of a nation or a people that may have been oppressed, that they shouldn't allow that hatred and that anger to consume them, or to see themselves as victims who don't have to observe any laws of human decency. So the Torah portion again gives us a very enlightened view of what our responsibility is to each other and even to the stranger who lives among us. So I hope you can take that lesson to heart. Many of the rich lessons from the reading of the Torah, the portion of Mishpatim this week, and I wish you and your loved ones Shabbat Shalom.